If you're going to do a shoot, chances are you're going to be working with multiple cameras and maybe multiple different types of cameras. The easiest way I found to deal with a situation like that is try and get everything as close as possible between the cameras, but keep it very, very simple. The reason I say that is because if you have multiple cameras, you likely have multiple shooters. And anytime there's someone behind the camera, they're likely going to be making their own subjective opinions about, what looks in focus, what looks properly exposed, what looks right in terms of color. And it can be really challenging syncing up all those subjective opinions if you don't have someone kind of coordinating and directing it all. Now, that may or may not be the case depending on your shoot, but one thing that's really easy to do is pick like a few set white balances. Okay, so for example, if you're going to be filming outside, maybe you say 5500. That's our Kelvin for outside white balance. If we're inside, it's 3200. Whatever you prefer, it doesn't really matter, but that way everyone can be on the same page. So when you're working with multiple shooters on multiple cameras, you can say, hey, let's go to our outside white balance, or hey, everyone go to 5500, or hey, everyone go to 3200. That way there's no room for any subjective interpretation of what needs, oh, is it 5300? Is it 5600? That can be a nightmare in post-production when you're trying to color all these different cameras and they're all slightly different. It's not impossible, but it's more challenging, and you definitely don't want to put that on whoever's doing your post-production. It might even be yourself. Now, if you have different cameras, like let's say you have a GoPro and you have a GH4, well, that's going to be far more challenging because matching those cameras is next to impossible in camera. But picking stuff that'll get you close, so finding the picture profile that matches between the two cameras or gets you as close as possible is ideal, and then sticking to it. Don't feel like you need to change things on the fly. Anytime you're in a situation where you're changing things on the fly, it just opens you up to errors. So if you have a picture profile, try and stick with that picture profile throughout the production. Yes, there may be times where you want to change it because of the recording setup or because of the nature of the scene, but in general, try and pick something and stick to it. Certainly don't have one picture profile on one camera, and if you have the same type of camera, have a different picture profile on the other one. That makes no sense. Don't do that. Now, so trying to keep all that stuff the same, and again, minimizing the opportunity for something to go wrong or be open to subjective interpretation. So also, if you're leading the shoot, pick a shutter angle or a shutter speed that everything we do, this is what we're doing for our shutter speed so that everything matches. You don't want to be simulating motion blur in post-production. As far as the details under the picture profile, make sure all of those are the same. Make sure that all the cameras are in the same mode in terms of the recording format. Make sure that if you're recording 4K, everyone is set to 4K, and then stick to it. Now, there might be times where you want to switch to 1080 for slow motion, but establish that ahead of time. Say, okay, for the interview portion, we're going to do 4K, and then for all the B-roll, we're going to do 1080-60. Or for this segment of the commercial, we're going to do 1080-60. Make sure everyone is in that because this is a slow-mo shot. Have those conversations beforehand, get some things established so that when you go out and say, hey, we're doing a slow-mo shot, people already know, oh, that's 1080-60 or 1080-120 or 4K-120, whatever cameras you're using. It doesn't really matter. Just have something locked and planned in advance because, again, the last thing you want to do is have different people, different cooks in the kitchen, all adding their own spices and ingredients and flavors, and then you get into post-production and everything is all over the place. I've seen people who prefer higher shutter speeds. I don't know why. They think it looks sharper. Someone told me that. It's sharper well, yeah, because you have less motion blur, but you have less motion blur, so it looks weird. Don't do that. I basically had to pull my boss card and say, no, I'm the boss on this. Don't do that. But there's also other little tweaks that you can make. You might be making slight tweaks to the color. For the most part, I like to keep it all the same so that we know that when we shot this, it was all daylight. Now, there might be some variations, different cameras, like even if you have a GH4 and a GH4, there might be some slight differences between those cameras, maybe between the sensors, but also maybe between the LCD displays. So one LCD might be slightly tuned different than the other one, and one person might be seeing it look, oh, mine looks green, and the other person's looking at their screen and they say, oh, mine looks magenta. Could also be the lens. It could also be filters that are put on there. But what I wouldn't recommend is going by the screen on the camera. If you go by the screen on the camera, you're opening yourself up to that variability in the screen, in the display. If you go by a number or you set a specific value to your white balance or to your shutter speed or to your aperture, whatever it is, and you lock it and you say, this is what we're shooting at, then you can account for it in post-production when you get back and say, oh, everything from this camera was a little bit green, but well, knowing that if it's from that camera, you can just offset that camera to magenta by whatever it is. Or if everything from this camera at this aperture was a little bit darker because the lens was a little bit slower for whatever reason, then you know, okay, I just have to boost it a little bit, or compensate on the other camera, pull it down just a little bit. So if you have consistency, that is the most important thing, and making sure everyone is on the same page, making sure all the cameras are set the same or as close to the same as possible. That's going to put you in the best situation when you enter post-production, because that's when you're in it for the long haul. That's when all the stuff is shot. You can't go back and reshoot stuff. Well, you can. It's just really expensive, so I don't recommend it. But get it right when you shoot it the first time, so that in post-production your work is minimal, and then way you have time to do the cool creative stuff and really add a lot of flavor and pizzazz in post-production. You can make the color whatever you want in post-production, just get it right when you're on set. So that's the most important thing. Just be consistent across all your cameras, across all your people, get everyone on the same page so that the project is going to turn out right.